Episode 17, Master of the Game. Keith looked back to the black snake, who was still under his boot, and sneered. "You were so cocky just now. Listen carefully. I give you the same chance you're going to give me. Take off your clothes, and you can run away naked." The gang was dumbfounded, but looking at Keith's expression, it didn't seem like he was joking. The black snake knew that if he wanted to live, his only option was to do as Keith said. Reluctantly, he began to take off his clothes. The following scene was truly a spectacle. The hoodlums undressed and stood in front of Keith. Keith didn't hesitate to use the camera they'd brought to record the scene and set it to his phone. Once he was done, Keith said, "You should be smarter in the future. If I see you again, I'll teach you another lesson. Now get it lost." The gang looked as though they'd been pardoned from the guillotine that grabbed their clothes and limped away. Watching them go, Keith's expression was terrifyingly calm. "They are. You've shattered the gang's wish to teach you a lesson. Attribute point +1. They are. You've thwarted Blake's plan for revenge. Attribute point +1. Keith added 1 point to power and another to dexterity. Just as he was about to leave, the voice of the system sounded again. "There. One of your attributes has reached 20. You receive a random reward. Do you wish to draw your reward now?" Keith was delighted when he heard this, and he asked, "System, what's the meaning of this reward?" Ding! When any of the host's attributes reach 20, 30, or 40 points, the host will receive a random reward. The reward may be a skill, or perhaps one wish value or one attribute point. Keith nodded and said, "I'll take it now." Ding! Drawing reward for host. Please wait a moment. Keith prayed with all his might that it would be a new skill. Ding! Said the system. You've obtained a new skill. Master of the game. Master of the game? Keith opened his mouth. His prayers had been answered, but the skill he'd gained wasn't much use to him at all. I guess it's better than a wish value. He smiled to himself for a moment before his face darkened again. Blake. Keith walked in the opposite direction of the police barracks until he reached Shallow Water Bay, one of the wealthiest suburbs in Summerfield. Such a place naturally had the strictest security measures. Surveillance cameras were everywhere, as well as security guards who patrolled at night and countless infrared sensors. A gust of wind blew past, and one of the security guards seemed to sense something. He looked around and found nothing unusual, so he lowered his head and yawned again. Keith arrived at a large villa. After taking a deep breath, he launched a kick at the front door. The door shook violently, and with just a few more kicks, it collapsed. Blake's family woke up at the commotion. The bodyguards downstairs rushed over, only to be greeted by Keith's iron fists and flying coins. The two bodyguards were caught off guard and were soon knocked out on the ground. Magnus Carrington and his wife rushed out to check on the situation and were shocked when they saw the young man downstairs. Magnus knew all about Keith. He'd been the one to contact the Black Snake to take revenge for his son Blake. Keith stood proudly in the living room, and raised his head to look into Magnus's eyes. His expression was angry, and Magnus was a little scared. He knew that he was in big trouble today. "Mr. Carrington," Keith waved the camera in his hand. He said coldly, "Since you're the one responsible for all this, why don't you come down and have a chat with me?" Magnus had been in the business for dozens of years, and he'd experienced enough to stay calm in the situation. He whispered to his wife beside him, "Take Blake out the back door and run." However, before he could finish speaking, a coin glinting with a cold light brushed past his ears, shattering a beautiful crystal lamp behind them. Keith smiled faintly and said, "Ma'am, I came to visit you especially. Are you leaving already? What's no way to treat your guests, is it?" Magnus's wife had never been faced with such a threatening situation. She was so scared that her knees went weak and she almost collapsed. By now, the rest of the security guards in the villa had heard the news and rushed over. The head security guard looked at the scene in front of him and said in surprise, "Mr. Carrington, what's going on?" Magnus was relieved, but when he saw Keith waving the camera in his hand, he knew that Keith must have evidence of his crimes. He had no choice but to go along with Keith's act. His voice was a little shaky as he said, "Hey, it's fine, Bobby. This is a family friend. There's nothing to worry about. You can be on your way." The head of security wasn't a fool. He could tell that the current situation was definitely not right, but everyone who lived here had their secrets. And if the boss had said to leave, it wasn't the security guard's job to interfere in other people's matters. So he looked at Keith again and nodded. "I'm glad that everything is all right. I'll leave you to it, sir." He led his man out of the room, stopping briefly to pick up the smashed door and prop it against the frame. Keith smiled faintly and said, "Mr. Carrington, seems that you've already figured this out. Where's Blake? Don't you want me to join us?" Magnus knew that Keith had come to cause trouble, and he became even more nervous. He knew very well that the current situation was disadvantageous to him. This kid had taken care of his bodyguards with just a few moves. His martial arts skills were amazing, and he was still holding the video camera that Magnus had given to the Black Snake. The video camera held evidence that Magnus had paid the Black Snake to kill Keith. If the news spread, the Carrington family would lose an astronomical amount of money. He might even go to jail. Magnus let a long sigh and said to his wife, "Go and get Blake. I believe Keith is a responsible person. He won't make things difficult for us." When Keith heard his words, he smiled and said, "Mr. Carrington, it seems that you've already thought about this matter, but you got one thing wrong. I'm not a reasonable person. If someone attacks me, I'll take my revenge." Magnus didn't seem surprised, but his wife was so scared by Keith's words that she crumpled to the ground. After a moment, Keith sat on the couch. Magnus and his family came downstairs and sat opposite him. Blake trembled and looked at Keith in fear. He'd never thought that a loser like Keith could overpower him and his family. Even if his father was CEO of the Carrington Group, he had no way to deal with Keith. Blake was very afraid. He was afraid that once Keith got angry, he would beat him to a pulp, and Keith now had evidence that they'd committed a crime. His father had too much to lose to risk letting this go public. Whatever Keith wanted to do now, Blake realized that his father would probably choose to swallow his anger.